You think you know who you are? You don't. You think your personality is fixed. Your habits, your reactions, your way of thinking, but they're not. They were built, slowly, quietly, over time, from everything you experienced, everything you heard, everything you repeated, until it became you. But that version of you is not original. It's conditioned, programmed, shaped by your environment, your past, your patterns. That's why you react the way you do. That's why you think the way you do. That's why you stay the way you are. Not because you chose it, but because it was built. And once something is repeated enough, it becomes automatic. You don't question it. You don't analyze it. You just live it. That's how identity forms. Not from truth, but from repetition. You repeat a thought long enough, you start believing it. You repeat a behavior long enough, it becomes a habit. You repeat a pattern long enough, it becomes your identity. And once it becomes your identity, you defend it, you protect it, you act from it. Even if it's limiting you, even if it's holding you back, because your brain prefers consistency. It wants you to stay the same, because the same feels safe. Changing your identity feels like losing control, feels like stepping into the unknown, and your brain resists that, hard. It creates doubt, it creates fear, it creates reasons to stay the same, because the version of you right now is predictable. Even if it's not powerful, even if it's not successful, even if it's not what you want, it's familiar. And familiarity feels like safety. That's why people say, "This is just who I am," but it's not. It's just who you've been repeating, and that's where the trap is. You don't act based on what you want. You act based on who you think you are. If your identity says, "I'm not disciplined," you won't act disciplined. If your identity says, "I always quit," you will quit. If your identity says, "I'm not confident," you will hesitate. Not because you can't do differently, but because your brain is trying to stay consistent. It wants your actions to match your identity. That's how it keeps everything stable, predictable, safe. But that stability is what keeps you stuck, because every time you try to grow, your identity pulls you back. You try to change, but your mind says, "This is not you. You don't do this. You're not that kind of person." And you believe it. You go back to the same patterns, the same habits, the same results. That's why change feels so hard, not because the action is difficult, but because it conflicts with your identity. And identity is powerful. It shapes everything: what you notice, what you believe, what you do. And most importantly, what you don't do. That's why two people with the same opportunity get completely different results. One sees it and acts, the other hesitates and misses it. Not because of ability, but because of identity. One believes, "This is for me." The other believes, "This is not for me." And that belief changes everything, because your brain filters reality to match who you think you are. It shows you what fits and hides what doesn't. That's why you miss opportunities. That's why you doubt yourself. That's why you stay small. Not because the world is limited, but because your identity is. And this is where everything changes. The moment you realize your identity is not fixed, it's flexible, it can be rebuilt, rewritten, redefined. Because it was built once, it can be built again, but this time, intentionally, not by accident. Not by repetition without awareness, but by choice. Because identity is not what you say, it's what you do repeatedly. That's the key. You don't become confident by thinking, you become confident by acting. You don't become disciplined by wishing, you become disciplined by doing. You don't become a different person by hoping. You become a different person by behaving differently, consistently, even when it feels unnatural, even when it feels uncomfortable. Because at first, it will. Your brain will resist, your mind will push back, because you're breaking the pattern. But if you continue, something shifts. The new behavior becomes familiar. The familiar becomes normal, and the normal becomes you. That's how identity changes. Not instantly, but through repetition, through action, through consistency. And once your identity shifts, everything else follows. Your decisions change, your focus changes, your standards change, your life changes. Because now, you're not trying to act differently. You are different. And that's the difference most people miss. They try to change their life without changing who they are. And it never lasts, because the old identity always pulls them back. But once identity changes, there's nothing to pull you back to, because the old version no longer exists. So the next time you say, "This is just who I am," pause and ask yourself, or is this just what I've been repeating? Because the answer might change everything.